At 0217 hours on April 5, 1968, Commander James R. Halvorsen stood inside the narrow control room of the USS Barracuda, SSN 593, 50 miles east of Haiphong Harbor. A low hum from the nuclear reactor filled the compartment. Every red-lit gauge told him one thing. His boat was silent, invisible, and dangerously close to the enemy coast. For weeks, Soviet trawlers and North Vietnamese patrol craft had been escorting freighters carrying radar systems and surface-to-air missiles through the Gulf of Tonkin. Washington needed to know where those convoys originated, and to stop them if possible. Barracuda's mission was clear: intercept, identify, and destroy any ship delivering Soviet material to Haiphong. Halvorsen, 38, a career submariner from Minnesota, had commanded 2 previous patrols off the Chinese coast. Both were recon only. This time, he'd been authorized to fire. "If they're arming the SAMs shooting down our pilots," Admiral Vern Davis told him before departure, "I want them at the bottom of the South China Sea." At 0245, sonar picked up twin screws, slow, steady, merchant pattern. Then another, faster, smaller contact weaving alongside, a North Vietnamese gunboat. Halvorsen's XO, Lieutenant Mark Fuller, whispered, "Range 15,000 yards. Bearing 085. Escort in close formation." Halvorsen studied the plot. The convoy was heading straight toward the mine channel south of Haiphong. Set depth 150 feet. Open outer doors, tubes 1 through 4. Between 1965 and 1968, U.S. submarines rarely engaged in direct combat near North Vietnam. The risk of political escalation was too high. Soviet advisors were everywhere. But Halvorsen had orders stamped top secret/eyes only. If detected, Washington would deny everything. At 0302, Barracuda rose to periscope depth. Through the damp lens, Halvorsen saw faint running lights, 1 freighter, 1 gunboat. He could almost smell the diesel. "Solution ready," said fire control. "Tube 1, mark." A hiss, then silence. 31 seconds later, a blinding flash split the night horizon. The freighter's midsection erupted. Its bow lifted clear of the water before folding in half. The gunboat slewed hard to port, searchlights stabbing wildly. Barracuda went deep for 100 feet, silent running. Depth charges followed 6, then 12, each one closer. The hull trembled. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes. Chief Engineer Hayes whispered, "She's bracketing us, skipper." Halvorsen smiled thinly. "Let her waste her ordnance." At 0415, sonar reported the gunboat circling aimlessly above. The freighter was gone. A single hit, 6,000 tons of cargo vaporized. But the radio intercept team caught something else. Russian voices on encrypted channels coordinating a search and destroy sweep. Barracuda had killed not a North Vietnamese freighter, but a Soviet-flagged transport. By sunrise, every North Vietnamese patrol craft between Haiphong and Hainan was in the water. 2 Soviet Kotlan-class destroyers departed from Hainan Naval Base to join the hunt. For the first time in the war, a U.S. submarine was being pursued by both communist navies. Halvorsen ordered a course south toward the Paracel Islands. "We're ghosts until further notice," he told his crew. "No radio, no beacon. If we're hit, Washington never knew we existed." 3 days later, April 8th at 0220 hours, Barracuda was still running silent. The crew hadn't slept more than 2 hours each in 3 days. Oil leaks were sealed with rags. Coffee tasted like seawater. On sonar, constant pings echoed from above, destroyers sweeping wide arcs. Then a faint metallic rhythm appeared beneath the chaos. 2 contacts, close, moving in perfect sync. "Submarine?" Fuller asked. Halvorsen leaned over the display. "No, that's twin prop shafts, torpedo boats." The enemy had changed tactics. Instead of depth charging blindly, they deployed small, fast P-4 boats fitted with sonar buoys and Soviet-set 40 torpedoes. A new kind of danger. Agile, expendable, and deadly in shallow waters. At 0235, one of the boats crossed directly overhead. Sonar screamed as an active ping slammed into Barracuda's hull. "They've got us!" shouted Hayes. "Flood bow tubes." Halvorsen ordered. Prepare down the throat shot. Range 800 yards. Fire 1. The torpedo streaked upward, detonating seconds later. The P-4 vanished in a column of fire. The second torpedo boat turned to ram, dropping 2 depth charges from its stern. One exploded close enough to crack light fixtures. Another jammed the aft dive planes. Barracuda tilted 40 degrees before Halvorsen corrected manually. By 0300, sonar recorded no further contacts. 2 enemy boats destroyed in under 20 minutes. But Barracuda had suffered internal damage. Leaks in the control room, warped bulkheads, 1 wounded sailor. They were alive barely. At 0500, Halvorsen finally allowed himself to speak above a whisper. 2 gunboats, 1 Soviet freighter. And the ocean wants us dead. That's 3 in 72 hours. He didn't yet know that Moscow had already lodged a formal protest in New York, accusing the U.S. Navy of unprovoked attacks in neutral waters. The Pentagon denied any knowledge of such an operation. Barracuda's patrol logs were sealed. The crew called themselves the Forgotten Ghosts. But in the Soviet Pacific Fleet, a new name circulated, the Destroyer of Haiphong. And Halvorsen was just getting started. At 0612 hours on April 9, 1968, the USS Barracuda lay motionless beneath 320 feet of South China Sea. The hull creaked under pressure. The temperature inside the control room had climbed to 95 degrees. Every man aboard smelled of sweat and hydraulic oil. Commander James R. Halvorsen stared at the depth gauge and said nothing. Above them, 2 Soviet-built Skory-class destroyers swept their sonar cones back and forth like predators sniffing blood. Contact bearing 093, range 2,000 yards. They're pinging every 7 seconds, whispered sonarman First Class Nate Wilder. Halvorsen nodded. They're tightening the circle. Hold course. Flood tubes 5 through 8. Between 1965 and 1968, the Gulf of Tonkin had become a chessboard of steel. U.S. destroyers like Maddox and Turner Joy patrolled the open sea while submarines lurked near Haiphong, mapping mines and intercepting Soviet supply routes. But none had fought this close to enemy destroyers. At 0619, a metallic echo shook the hull active sonar from directly above. The Soviets had a fix. Depth charges followed, first 6, then a dozen. Each detonation thudded like a hammer against the ribs of the sub. Circuit breakers popped. The lights flickered to red emergency glow. Pressure hull intact, Chief Hayes reported. Halvorsen exhaled. Then let's remind them why they should have stayed in Vladivostok. Tube 5, fire. The Mark 48 torpedo tore away, silent as death. 22 seconds later, a roar rolled through the water. 1 Skory's stern vanished in a bloom of gas and shattered steel. The second destroyer turned hard to port, launching mortars and dropping more charges. But Barracuda was already sliding beneath her keel. The sonar team heard the sound every submariner prays for, the dull crump of imploding bulkheads above. 2 destroyers in 2 days. At 0800, Halvorsen sent a short burst transmission to Pearl Harbor using the one-time pad cipher. Confirmed 2 Skory destroyers sunk. Enemy ASW operations expanding southward. Continuing patrol. Admiral Vern Davis read the message in silence. If Moscow discovered the truth, the war could ignite beyond Vietnam. Davis ordered all records classified top secret. Do not disclose to State Department. Meanwhile, Barracuda hunted southward. April 10th, 0210 hours. Down the throat, the sonar room erupted in whispers. Fast contact. Bearing 027. Range 5,000 yards and closing. Halvorsen leaned over the scope. Through the green haze, he saw a silhouette slicing across the moonlit surface, a Soviet-built Komar missile boat, one of the same types that had crippled an Israeli destroyer with Styx missiles a year before. They'll fire surface to surface if they see us, Fuller warned. They won't see us, Halvorsen said. Angle on the bow 65. Range 1800. Tube 1, shoot. The torpedo hit dead center. The Komar split in half. Both pieces burned as they sank. Fuel oil shimmered across the surface like molten glass. 2 hours later, another contact appeared, a North Vietnamese escort trawler, small but armed with depth bombs. Halvorsen led it close to 1,000 yards, then ordered an emergency ascent to periscope depth. The trawler's crew barely registered the rising periscope before a torpedo struck under its wheelhouse. The explosion blew men and debris 40 feet into the air. By April 11th, Barracuda had destroyed 4 enemy vessels in less than 72 hours. The North Vietnamese Navy began transmitting coded distress calls intercepted by NSA listening stations in Da Nang. Soviet advisors in Haiphong demanded reinforcements. Moscow dispatched 2 ASW helicopters from a fleet tender off Hainan. At 1,320 hours, the first Mi-4 helicopter appeared overhead. Its sonar dunked into the sea with a hollow splash. The crew aboard Barracuda heard the ping reverberate through the hull. Slow, methodical, patient. "They're fishing for ghosts," Fuller muttered. Halvorsen grinned. "Then let's haunt them." He ordered the reactor to minimum output, the boat drifting almost motionless. The sonar ping slid past, then faded. 10 minutes later, another sound approached, the rhythmic thrash of rotor blades directly overhead. "Sir, helicopter number 2, bearing 172, Halvorsen whispered. "Prepare counter-maneuver. Surface in 3, 2, 1. Barracuda broke the surface 30 yards behind the hovering Mi-4. The sudden updraft threw the chopper off balance. The sub's 5-inch deck gun fired once, a thunderous crack that ripped through the dawn air. The shell hit the helicopter's fuel tank. Flames engulfed the craft as it crashed into the water. For Halvorsen's crew, the kill was more than survival. It was disbelief. No U.S. submarine had ever shot down an aircraft during the Vietnam War. April 11th to 12th, the counterhunt. By the morning of April 11th, every Soviet and North Vietnamese ship within 200 miles of Haiphong had received orders. Find the American intruder, destroy on sight. 3 destroyers, 2 corvettes, and multiple torpedo boats formed a hunter-killer line stretching across the southern entrance to the Gulf. Halvorsen studied their formation through sonar traces. "They expect us to run east, so we go west." At 1,530 hours, Barracuda slipped toward the shallows near the paracels. The seabed rose sharply. The sub's keel hovered only 30 feet above coral ridges. Any miscalculation would tear the hull open, but the shallow layer distorted sonar pings, a perfect hiding place. For 6 hours, the destroyers searched and fired depth charges at phantoms. At 2200, they withdrew north. Halvorsen surfaced to recharge batteries. The sky was black, no moon, only the faint lightning of a distant storm. Then, at 2234, radar picked up 3 blips, a convoy heading from Hainan toward Haiphong, escorted by a Soviet destroyer. Halvorsen knew what this meant. One more chance. "Battle stations," he ordered. At 2300, Barracuda closed to 4,500 yards. Rain began to hammer the sea. Lightning illuminated the destroyer's outline, a Rakita-class ship bristling with depth charges. Halvorsen waited until it turned directly toward them. "Bow on." "Down the throat," he murmured. "Fire 3, fire 4. 2 torpedoes shot forward. The destroyer's sonar officer realized too late. He had mistaken the approach angle. Both torpedoes slammed into the ship's forward magazine. The explosion split the vessel in 2. Flames reached 100 feet high. The freighters scattered. Barracuda dived deep, silent. By dawn on April 12th, the radio intercept team aboard a U.S. destroyer off Da Nang received Soviet emergency transmissions. Rakita-class destroyer lost south of Hainan. Cause unknown. 5 enemy warships in 4 days. But victory had a price. Barracuda's port reactor coolant pump had begun leaking. The sonar dome was cracked, and fuel reserves were down to 30%. The crew's hands trembled from exhaustion. Halvorsen gathered his officers. "We've done enough damage to make Moscow rethink every patrol they've planned for the next month. But we're not home yet." No one replied. They simply nodded. Every man aboard understood. They'd become both heroes and ghosts, unseen architects of a battle no one would ever admit happened. By the time the USS Barracuda turned south toward Subic Bay on April 13th, She had rewritten the rules of underwater warfare. Admiral Davis would later describe the patrol in his classified report as the most effective covert engagement of the Vietnam conflict. But Halvorsen's war wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, he'd return to the Gulf, and this time he wouldn't come back. On May 2, 1968, the USS Barracuda slipped out of Subic Bay before dawn. Her hull still bore scars from April's patrol. One dent near the bow had been patched with welded steel that whined under pressure. Commander James R. Halvorsen stood on the sail as the Philippine coastline disappeared behind the horizon. His new orders were handwritten, sealed in red wax, and carried a single line from Admiral Davis. Track and interdict Soviet supply operations near the Paracel Islands. Use discretion. Everyone aboard knew what that meant. If caught, they didn't exist. The crew was smaller now, 76 men instead of 80. 2 had been reassigned, 1 in the hospital with a crushed shoulder. Yet morale was iron. They'd sunk 5 enemy ships in 4 days. They believed they could do it again. At 0437 hours on May 4th, sonar reported faint screws northeast of the Paracels. Pattern analysis showed a convoy, 3 cargo ships, and 2 escorts. Halvorsen ordered a silent approach. The sea was glass calm. Every propeller beat echoed like a drum. Range 6,000 yards, Wilder whispered. Halvorsen's eyes never left the scope. Flood tubes 1 through 4. We'll take the lead freighter and her escort. At 0451, he gave the order. For torpedoes hissed away. 20 seconds later, 2 impacts. 1 freighter destroyed, 1 escort crippled. The sea erupted in white foam and fire. The second escort began dropping depth charges, scattering patterns blindly. Barracuda dove deep. At 0513 hours, sonar picked up another engine noise, low frequency, fast, deliberate. That's not a trawler, Fuller said. That's a hunter. Indeed it was, a Soviet-built Petya-class anti-submarine frigate, equipped with new sonar and RBU 6000 rocket launchers. The Soviets had learned from April. They weren't chasing shadows now, they were stalking methodically. At 0530, the first salvo of rockets detonated 150 feet above Barracuda. The hull groaned like a wounded animal. Depth 400 feet, Halvorsen ordered. Silent running. The next volley came closer. The lights flickered out, replaced by the emergency glow. Water sprayed from a ruptured pipe near the stern. Chief Hayes wiped blood from his forehead. We can't take many more hits, Skipper. Halvorsen nodded. Then we make them miss. He ordered an unorthodox maneuver, reverse thrust, ballast blow, and hard-up angle. Barracuda shot upward like a torpedo herself, passing beneath the Petya's sonar cone. For 30 seconds, they were invisible. Now, Halvorsen said. Tube 5, fire. The Mark 48 left the tube and ran true. The explosion shattered the morning silence. The Petya's bow lifted, then folded. She broke apart in less than a minute. Cheers filled the control room, but they died quickly. Sonar picked up 2 more contacts, closing fast. Reinforcements. At 0605, the first new frigate arrived. Barracuda was running at flank speed, trying to reach deeper water east of the Paracels. The seafloor dropped from 400 to 200 feet. Safety if they could reach it. Depth 800, Hayes called. Level off, Halvorsen ordered. Then came the hit. A pattern of depth charges landed almost perfectly along the stern. 1 detonated within 30 feet of the hull. The shockwave knocked men from their stations. Gauges burst. Seawater flooded the after torpedo room. Flooding aft compartment, someone shouted. Seal it, Halvorsen barked. All hands forward. For 10 minutes they fought the sea with pumps and prayer. The water kept coming. Barracuda's stern began to sink, nose rising. At 0618 hours, Halvorsen made his decision. Blow all ballast. Emergency surface. The boat shuddered upward, breaching the surface in a violent spray. The enemy frigate, less than a mile away, opened fire with 57mm guns. Shells ripped through the sail. Halvorsen climbed the ladder to the bridge, trying to spot a gap between bursts. Dive, sir, someone screamed. He didn't hear the shell that hit the conning tower. The blast threw him backward into the sea. Below, Fuller took command. Dive, dive, dive! Barracuda went under again, but the damage was fatal. The aft compartments were flooded beyond recovery. At 0632 the hull creaked, then screamed as steel met its limit. One last transmission went out on the emergency beacon frequency. We are hit. Depth 800. God bless the crew. The signal cut off mid-word. Sonar aboard a U.S. destroyer 120 miles away caught the echo of a collapsing hull, one long, descending groan fading into silence. 76 men died within minutes. Aftermath. For official records, USS Barracuda was listed as missing on patrol. No press release, no ceremony. The Pentagon couldn't admit a nuclear submarine had been operating inside North Vietnamese waters. Families received quiet letters expressing profound regret. But the Soviets knew. Their naval attaché in Hanoi reported the loss of 1 frigate and 3 escorts during intense anti-submarine activity. Privately, Moscow circulated the story as proof that American aggression had escalated to illegal submarine warfare. Admiral Davis, reading the intercepts, simply wrote in his log, "Barracuda achieved her mission. She forced the Soviet fleet to retreat from the Paracels for 6 weeks. Strategic success, total loss." The war rolled on, but beneath the classified archives, Barracuda's legend grew. Her tactics, charging destroyers head-on, surfacing to attack aircraft, using shallow reef acoustics for concealment, became required reading for every new submarine commander. In 1975, after the fall of Saigon, the Navy quietly declassified part of her patrol reports. For the first time, families learned that Barracuda had sunk 8 enemy warships and crippled 3 others in less than a month. Commander Halvorsen was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, demonstrating unmatched valor in submarine warfare." Epilogue. In 2019, an international search team using autonomous submersibles discovered a wreck resting upright 210 miles east of the Paracel Islands at a depth of 3,950 feet. The sonar image showed a shattered sail, torpedo tubes open, reactor compartment intact. The identification plate read, USS Barracuda, SSN 593. The site was declared a war grave. No attempt was made to raise her. Every year, on May 4th, surviving submariners from the Vietnam era gather at Pearl Harbor's Submarine Memorial. Among the plaques etched in bronze, one reads, USS Barracuda, SSN 593, the destroyer of Haiphong. Lost May 4th, 1968, 76 souls. When the enemy expected retreat, she charged. Today, at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, cadets still study her patrol as a case study in asymmetric warfare. Instructors emphasize the lesson that Commander Halvorsen wrote in his final margin note before the patrol. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's turning toward it faster than your enemy expects.